What's up, everybody? I'm Roman Gennaro. Welcome back to Empire Sports Talk, and I want to talk about Kalen DeBoer. Let's do it. So, I wish I could say I was surprised, but here we are. It is Labor Day as we're recording this. Happy Labor Day. It is Monday as we're recording this, following Alabama's 31-17 loss against Florida State to open the 2025 season. I wish I could say I was surprised, but if you've been following the podcast for a while, when Kalen DeBoer was hired in January of 2024, I went on an episode. It was episode 73, titled Kangaroo Court, uploaded on January 14th, 2024. And then I went on to post a quote from it a few days later. But on January 14th, 2024, just a few days after Kalen DeBoer was hired by Alabama, I went on record as saying this was not the right decision. And there were some that commented and said, you're not giving him a chance. He did really good things at Washington and at Indiana and at Sioux Falls. And I even said on that episode, I said, he is a great coach. He's a good coach. But the SEC is different. But taking over for Nick Saban's legacy is different. And here we are, 14 games in to Kalen DeBoer's Alabama tenure, and he is 9-5. 9-5. And now he's lost to Florida State. Of his 5 losses, Google says that in 4 of his 5 losses, Alabama was the betting favorite. But who they're not including in that is Michigan in the 2025 ReliaQuest Bowl, who Alabama lost to. And Alabama was the favored team in that bowl game because Michigan was barely bowl eligible a year ago, barely snuck into a bowl. These are 2 teams that should have done a lot better, that were in the playoff a year before, faced off in the college football playoff a year before, and were very disappointing the following season. So, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida State, and yes, Michigan, even though Google doesn't seem to remember that Alabama was favored in that bowl game, all 5 of Kalen DeBoer's losses were when Alabama was the favored team. You could say they were favored on a lot of those games because they were Alabama. They were underdogs against Georgia, and that was the one game they won. The one game of any significance. And let's not forget that the week following the Vanderbilt game, they almost lost to South Carolina when South Carolina was not. Obviously, in 2025, South Carolina is ranked in the top 25, and their quarterback is a Heisman candidate and a potential first-round pick. It was a different South Carolina team in 2024, and Alabama won by 2 points. This is not Nick Saban's Alabama. This is not Bear Bryant's Alabama. The coach that comes to mind immediately, even though he was not Bear Bryant's direct successor, I've talked about him a few times on this podcast, is Bill Curry. And I think about Bill Curry a lot because in a 2011 documentary done by ESPN, Bill Curry, who went 0-3 against Auburn in his tenure at Alabama over 3 seasons, said, I know you don't get 3 shots at Auburn, lose, and keep your job. Now this is a different scenario because Kalen DeBoer is currently 1-0 against Auburn, so you're like, why are you talking about Auburn? What I bring that up is, Bill Curry was a couple of coaches removed from Bear Bryant, but the standard was still there. Bill Curry was actually a pretty good coach for Alabama over 3 years. He won multiple bowl games. He went 26-10 over 3 seasons, but the problem was he went 0-3 against Auburn. He knew walking into that office before anyone said anything that he was gone because he lost to Auburn a 3rd time. He knew the standard, and he knew he didn't live up to it. And I'm starting to feel that's what Kalen DeBoer is feeling, knowing he's not living up to the standard. Because Bill Curry got fired after 3 years, and he had 10 losses. He had 10 losses in 36 games. Kalen DeBoer is less than half of that into his tenure at Alabama, and he's already got half of those losses. To Vanderbilt, to Oklahoma, to Florida State a year removed from being 2-10. Did Bill Curry lose to Auburn 3 times? Yes. But do you know what Bill Curry never did? Lose to Vanderbilt. He was undefeated against Vanderbilt in his 3 seasons. I think the seat is getting scorching hot for Kalen DeBoer. I think the leash is about the length of a teaspoon. I don't know if, unless Alabama wins out, I don't know if he survives this season. Maybe he survives the season, but I'm going to adjust the prediction I made in January 24. And that was, I said in 4 seasons he would go 2-2 against Auburn and get fired. I'm now going to change that. I believe that he moves on after this season. There's already people asking about how much his buyout is, which I believe it's in the neighborhood of like $78 million or something like that. But we already have CBS Sports, ESPN, and other outlets publishing articles. CBS Sports published yesterday, August 31st, about Kalen DeBoer's buyout, about Alabama moving on. And I think Alabama realizes they may have made a mistake because they chose the shiny toy. I'll get to that in a second. But now my prediction is that he gets fired after this season, unless he wins out. They might give him a 3rd year, and they go 12-1. Or, on the flip side of that, if he loses to Vanderbilt again, and this year's Vanderbilt team, from what I'm hearing, is better than last year's. If he loses to Vanderbilt again, I think he gets fired on the field following the game. As he should, honestly. Because Vanderbilt may be better, but they're still Vanderbilt. It didn't surprise me that Alabama lost this first game to Florida State. Because I looked at how Ty Simpson looked in that game. You have an entire offseason coming off of a disappointing season. In which you had Jalen Milroe was a really good quarterback. You're coming off a bad season. You have all offseason knowing that you're preparing for Florida State, knowing that Florida State went 2-10 a year ago. You know they're coming. And then their quarterback, Castellanos, gets out there and says they don't have Nick Saban to save them. Nick Saban would have put that on the bulletin board and said, do not let this be a problem. Shut it down. They gave you bulletin board material, and then you let them accomplish it. You had all offseason to pick a quarterback. You had all offseason to say, one of you has to take the reins, one of you has to be prepared for this. They chose Ty Simpson, and Ty Simpson looked overwhelmed from the first snap. Almost every drop back, within a second and a half, he's running for his life. Yes, Florida State had a lot of transfers in to help them rebound from this. Yes, it was week 1 where there were admittedly a lot of top teams that did not look very good. Texas didn't look very good. Clemson didn't look very good. And even the winning teams in those top 10 matchups, the pretty low scoring was, I think Ohio State and Texas was 17-10. It's week 1. Okay, and that's where I'll give players like Arch Manning a little bit of slack. And there's people out there saying, oh, he's a bust. He's adopted. There's a reason he was sitting behind Quinn Ewers. Or it was the first game of the season at Ohio State against the defending national champions. And even though he's a 3rd-year quarterback, it's his first year as a starter. And this was by far the biggest game of his career. And with the added fanfare of it being game day being there, Corso's last pick, him picking the Buckeyes, there was a lot of pressure on Arch Manning. So I'm not willing yet to sell the Arch Manning stock. Is it possible that he isn't as good as we thought? Yes, absolutely. But he also had a gauntlet of a first game. That being said, Florida State is not a gauntlet of a first game. Expectations at Florida State, because of a year ago, relatively low. Unless you go to Florida State, then you always think you're going to win the national championship. But what I saw on Saturday was pathetic. A quarterback that did not look prepared for the moment despite an entire offseason to prepare for that specific opponent. A head coach that still looks overwhelmed. And yes, there's been a lot of memes this week about the difference between Nick Saban's office and Kalen DeBoer's office. But visually, you can see the difference. It feels like the character was removed from the head coach's office. The joke is that it went from a head coach's office to a Verizon store. Ha ha ha. It was modernized. But all the character left the office. And you can almost feel, in turn, that the character left the program. One of the jokes that I saw the other day, but we really have to think honestly about it, was Kalen DeBoer owes Michael Penix monthly payments for getting him the job at Alabama. And that's easy to laugh off. Ha ha. They went to the national championship, so he gets the job at Alabama. But think about it. Kalen DeBoer had Michael Penix at Indiana. Kalen DeBoer brought Michael Penix with him to Washington. Michael Penix was a Heisman finalist in the season where Washington made the national championship game. Michael Penix was a first-round NFL draft pick. Michael Penix outperformed Kirk Cousins for the Atlanta Falcons. And Michael Penix is going to be the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons on a team that is expected to compete for the playoffs. Was it Kalen DeBoer or was it Michael Penix? And judging by what we've seen at the first 14 games at Alabama, I think it was Michael Penix. I think Jalen Milroe was a better college quarterback than Michael Penix. And he still lost 4 games with Jalen Milroe. There was another post talking about Arch Manning was exposed. Clemson was exposed. Alabama was exposed on week 1. And I don't think it was Alabama that was exposed. Alabama's still Alabama, and they're going to be Alabama after Kalen DeBoer is gone. The standard has always been there. It wasn't just Nick Saban. It started with Bear Bryant. Nick Saban just revitalized it. And when you follow the standard, and the standard declines rapidly, you don't get a long leash. I've always said you don't want to be the guy after the guy. And following their loss to Florida State, I couldn't feel more correct. Kalen DeBoer was the guy after the guy. He was the shiny toy. There were several high-profile coaches that turned down the Alabama job before Kalen DeBoer took it. Dan Lanning, Dabo Swinney turned it down. And I thought Dabo Swinney was the obvious choice. Things weren't going so well at Clemson a year ago. He's an Alabama alum. He's talked positively about Alabama in recent years. It made all the sense in the world. I even posted a graphic about it days before they named Kalen DeBoer the head coach. Chose the shiny toy. I think Dan Lanning would have been a much better head coach. Dabo Swinney would have been a much better head coach. The guy I think should now take the job would be a much better fit for the program. I think Kalen DeBoer was the one that said yes. And I think he's been exposed, and I think he's overwhelmed, and I do not think he's the right fit for this program. The house that Bear Bryant built and the house that Nick Saban revitalized. Kalen DeBoer's proven he shouldn't be living in it. I could go on about this for another 30 minutes, but I won't. This is not new. This is not me jumping on the bandwagon. You can go back on Empire Sports Talk to the day Kalen DeBoer was hired. And I've been saying the same thing. Not the right fit. Good coach, not the right fit. And today, September 1st, 2025, more than a year and a half later, I feel the same. I believe the Alabama Crimson Tide should cut bait with Kalen DeBoer following the season, unless he loses to Vanderbilt, and cut immediately. And then I think they should go full steam ahead to try to bring in Curt Cignetti from Indiana. And you might ask, why is he any different than Kalen DeBoer? One season of significant success and you want him to take over. Why him? Because he's an Alabama guy. because he was on Nick Saban's first staff at Alabama, because he recruited Mark Ingram, Julio Jones, and several of those other players that helped Nick Saban build that dynasty. Because Curt Cignetti coaches with a chip on his shoulder, similarly to the way Nick Saban does. Do I think they could get him? I don't know. Things are going pretty well at Indiana. He's making Indiana football relevant again. Plus, he took a shot at SEC scheduling in the offseason. But then, we had a great week 1, so who knows? But I think Curt Cignetti makes a lot of sense. My point being that Kalen DeBoer was the wrong choice from day 1, and a year and a half later, he's still the wrong choice. That's all I have for you on this video for Empire Sports Talk. I am Roman Gennaro, and we'll see you on the next one.